On the 15th of Shevat, in the year 1348, in the city of Tudela, a man named Yosef performed kidushin with a young woman named Belita. What began as a seemingly ordinary wedding ceremony quickly spiraled into a shocking controversy. People who were present at the wedding asked Belita whether she was truly consenting, and instead of her confirming, it was her father who spoke on her behalf. Further investigation revealed that Belita had previously stated her refusal to this marriage not once but twice, and in fact was already married to her uncle Avraham. To complicate matters, she was also engaged to a third man. This tangled web of relationships on the eve of the Black Death sweeping through Europe turned into a halachic dilemma that ultimately reached the desk of Rabbi Yehudah, the son of the Rosh.
The Rosh, Rabbeinu Asher ben Yechiel, one of the great Rishonim, had a number of children who were also prominent Rabbanim in their day. The one we're going to be focusing on today is Rabbi Yehudah. Rabbi Yehudah passed away in 1349. More about the circumstances of his passing at the end of this year. Like any good Rav, he responded to halachic questions that came his way, and those were collected, or at least part of them, a portion of them were collected and published under the title Scandalous Marriage Zichron Yehudah. He did not give the title to this work. The publisher, who published this work for the first time in Berlin in 1846, he gave it the name Zichron Yehudah. It also happens to be that the publisher, his name was Yehudah as well, Yehudah Rosenberg. So maybe he was winking to himself in addition to the subject of the author of the Tshuvas. As we're going to read in Siman Pei Aleph of this Zichron Yehudah, a very complicated case arose that eventually landed on the desk of Rabbi Yehudah, the son of the Rosh. Let's have a read. It describes, we're going to begin the scene where there is a wedding, and there is a kidushin. A man is being mekadesh a young woman, and one of the pieces of testimony describes what happens next as follows. Sha'alu mimena bifnei edim ksherim. They asked of the bride before kosher witnesses, im hoisa roitza bikidushe del beyo, whether she wants the kidushin of the chassan, who here is called del beyo of beyo. Beyo is a very, very small town somewhere in northern Spain. More about the location hopefully later on. And so the chassan is called Del Beyo, the guy from Beyo. Do you, Kala, do you want the kidushin from this man? Vishaska, and she was quiet in response. Now, you've all been to many weddings. You've probably never seen where they went to the Kala and said, do you want the kidushin from this man? That's not what happens. The guy gives a kidushin and she accepts it. So obviously, right away, we realize something is awry in this case. Moreover, more happened. V'oid, she'amar aviyah b'fanah, instead of her responding, remember she was quiet, her father responded in front of her. He says, I know, I'll answer. HaKidushin shal Yosef Beyo, so now we have the chassan's name, his name was Yosef of Beyo. Meritzainiheim, they're what I want. Umasha toiv be'enai, and what's good for me, hu toiv be'enai biti, is good for my daughter. So the father is saying, yep, this is what we want. Also, obviously, very, very odd for this to play out at a kidushin. Vishaska, she was quiet. Upashta yada, she extended her hand. Vikibla kidushin mimenu, and she accepted whatever the item that was being used for then to be mekadesh her, she accepted at that time. So what is going on over here? And for that we continue reading, because as we continue reading we're going to see that this actually only gets more odd. Because what happens is that there are two witnesses who testify about something that happened moments before the kidushin. We just read about a kidushin. Moments before that kidushin, something else happened. And here is the document that is produced in this tshuva, and it reads as follows. In front of us, the witnesses, this is what happened. Sha'amra lanu Belita bas Moshe. The Kala, her name is Belita, the daughter of Moshe. Belita in Spanish, bello means beautiful. So Belita is the diminutive of beautiful. So her name is Belita bas Moshe bar Chaim Nigri di Gurash. So that's his name. So this is what Belita said in front of us witnesses. Hayu alai edim, I want you to be witnesses. She'eni roitza. She'oisam ha-kedushin she'eya mekabelas ata mi Yosef. That the kedushin that I'm now going to accept from Yosef of Beo, who's the son of David al-Faranji, Dilbeo Yachulu. I don't want that it should take hold. V'makabel mimenu, and if I do accept kedushin from him, loy medaitir mitzayni. It's not what I want. Of alatzes resoin avi. I'm only doing this because it's what my father wants. So this is only getting weirder now. She is making a proclamation in front of witnesses before the Kedushin that she doesn't want to do this. She's only doing this because of her father. V'tekev zuha asra, and then right after this proclamation that she made, then ba Yosef hanisker miyad, then the chassan Yosef of Baal came, v'zimnanu le'edim, and we, the two of us, who just heard what this girl said, we were invited to be the official edim, v'nasan la kedushin b'fanenu, and we witnessed the kedushin. Now today, when you have a kedushin, it's immediately followed by shava brachas, yichud, nisuin, the whole thing. There it was just the kedushin, just the hareyat mekudesh asli with the two witnesses, and that's it. When did this happen? The 15th of Shevat, shnas hei alafim v'kuf ches lamin yonenu. If you're keeping score at home, that's the year 1348. Where? Be'argindes. Argudas. Argudas is a small area right outside the city of Tudela. Tudela is a city in northern Spain that's Navarre. The locations of these places is going to be important later on. So in northern Spain, there's a region that's called Navarre. In those days, it was an independent kingdom. And you may have heard of Pamplona, where they have the running of the bulls. So that's a big city in Navarre. So Tudela is the second biggest city in Navarre, and Argudas is a small suburb right outside Tudela, and this is where this wedding happened. And the two witnesses signed their names as Yehudah, the son of Yitzchak, ben Daud. Daud is the Arabic way of saying David. And Shemtov ben Avraham ben Amile. Amile is an Arabic name, it means hope. Remember, these areas were all once under Arab control, and so you see the Arab influences in names as well. So wow. You have a very interesting Kiddushin moment, and now we're learning that before the Kiddushin, the girl is saying she's not interested in this, she's only doing it because of her father. Why is her father wanting her to do this? Well, as we continue to read, the reality is she actually gave a proclamation a few days earlier. And in this proclamation, we're going to learn that the story only gets weirder. Befanenu edim hachasumim mata. In front of us, the witnesses who are signed below, Amru lanu Belita bas Moshe nigri di Gurash. So the Kala Belita told us, Hayu edim be'emes. I want you to be true witnesses. Shekibalti kidushin me Avraham doidi. That I've already accepted kidushin from Avraham, my father's brother, my uncle. According to the Torah, a woman is allowed to marry her uncle, and she's saying that's what happened. V'ani mikudeshes layata. I want you to know that I am already mikudeshes to him. V'ani merutza b'oisen ha-kidushin. I'm very happy with this kidushin. V'im yavai shum adam v'yikacheni. And if anyone comes, and anyone else is going to try to marry me, especially Yosef, the son of David, al-Faranji dilbeo. So I want to let you know, she'eni merutza b'oisen kidushin shidun. I don't want this kidushin because I'm already married to someone else, my uncle. When did this proclamation happen? This happened the day before. Yudalid l'chodesh Shvat, shnas hei alafim v'kuv ches le'yonenu, again in Argudas. V'oid amar lanu b'fanenu Avram, and then Avram, the uncle, shows up, and he says, I want you to know, I'm married to this young lady. Lo nasati get libelita al niskar, I never divorced her. So, if they're already married, why is this woman a date the next day going to get another Kiddushin that her father wants us to do? This is a very, very complicated story. Anyway, the second set of the witnesses signed this testimony, Yosef ben Shemtov ben Chassan. Chassan is the Arabic for chesed, kindness, or pious. And Chaim ben Reb Shloimeh, Nishmas Eden Al-Faraja. Al-Faraja is the Arabic for comforting, Nechama, or Nachum, or whatever it is. Okay, So what in the world is going on over here in this messy case? So that's going to become clear from the nusach of the she'ela that two rabbanim from Tudela sent to Rabbi Yehudah, the son of the Rosh, which is actually how the tshuva, which is toward the beginning of the tshuva. So let's read. She'ela shashalo arav Yomtiv ben Abbas. Abbas means in Arabic lion. V'arav Yehudah urabuna. Urabuna, I hope you could see in the words ura, sounds like the word hour. This is not Arabic. This is actually Latin. Ura is hour and bona is good hour. So his name is like Bishaha Tova. Okay, so that's his name. So there are two Rabbanim, Rabbi Yomtiv and Rabbi Yehudah, and they're asking a shaila Rabbi Yehudah ben Rosh al dvar shahaya bit Tudela, about the story that happened in the city of Tudela. Maise shahaya kachaya, here is the story. Ki Moshe Gurash, you have this man Moshe Gurash, he's Belita's father. Hadar Ba'argendis, he lives in this Argendis, right outside Tudela. Hifkid biyad David al Faranji, he deposited with this David, and David, his name is Al Faranji. This is the father of the Chassan. Al Faranji, by the way, means from France. Al Faranji, from France. Okay. Hadar bikfar El Beyo, and he resides in this town El Beyo. Pigata and Gadol, a very large deposit. Later it becomes clear in the case that the deposit is loan documents, or I shouldn't say loan documents, but documents that have a value that where money can be collected. And so this Moshe obviously wants those documents, but right now they're in David's hands. If they're in David's hands, you can't collect any money owed on those documents. So after a long time, Moshe goes to get his deposit, to get these documents from David. David responds to him, I'm not giving you what belongs to you. I want your daughter Belita to marry my son Yosef. This is what David, the father of Yosef, tells Moshe, the father of Belita. So now what's Moshe supposed to do? He realizes he'd rather be dead than alive if he doesn't have these documents, if he doesn't have this deposit, because elsewhere he writes, he's basically reduced to poverty, and he's going to have to schnorr going door to door. And so he really needs this. This is his parnasa right now, so what's he supposed to do? And the guy is telling him, I'm not going to give it to you. He tried coming up with a plan. How can I get my daughter to marry your son, but in a way that the kidushin shouldn't take effect according to halacha? So he spoke to his advisors, I guess some rabbinic scholars, and they came up with this idea. First, what you should do is have your brother Avraham be mekadesh your daughter. It could be Avraham was married already. Okay, say they're polygamy. Have the brother be mekadesher. They didn't accept the ban of Rabbeinu Gershom in this area. I'm not saying Avraham was for sure married. I don't know. There's no information. But either way, get your brother to be mekadesh your daughter. Because then, when he is mekadesher, he's being mekadesh, a married woman. A man who's mekadesh, a woman who's already married, it's nothing. You're not doing anything. It doesn't take any effect. Now, why do they need to come up with this whole scheme? You ever heard of a court of law? A bezdin? You could sue the guy. I have evidence. Those documents belong to me. Get it for me. This is where the locations, I think, actually matter. Figuring out where this place El Beyo is. If you check online and you put in El Beyo in Spain, you'll find that there's this area called Punja. It's about 480 kilometers west of Tudela. But look, for the most importantly, it's outside of the region of Navarre. It has nothing to do with Navarre. In fact, it was part of the kingdom of Castile. It's part of the kingdom of Castile. That means the Beis Din of Navarre has zero jurisdiction over there. The secular authorities have zero jurisdiction over there. So if you have a loan or a debt or whatever it is, money owed to you coming from there, you're going to have a very hard time collecting on that. Now, of course, you could go there and try to work it out. But apparently, he felt that that wasn't going to work. And so he comes up with this idea, this scheme. If it was local, this story wouldn't have happened. But because it's not local, he comes up with this idea, you know what, I'll give in to the kidushin. I'll just marry off my daughter first to my brother. But then, for extra protection, they came up with another idea. What was this idea? In addition to that, she will also make proclamations, not once but twice, saying, the kidushin I'm about to accept, I don't really want it. Remember, a woman cannot become mikudashas shaloi midaita. If she doesn't have das to accept kidushin, it's not effective. So here she's going to say twice, in front of two different sets of witnesses, that the kidushin she's eventually going to accept is not going to be binding. And so now the father is feeling really good about himself because he's covering all of his bases. He's doing something dangerous, but at the same time, he's protecting himself with three layers. Number one, he's marrying her off to the uncle. Number two, Maidah number one, proclamation number one, her saying, I'm not interested. And Maidah number two, her saying that she's not interested. And so hopefully these three steps are then he's going to get the deposit back from David, and then right after he gets the shtaris back from David, he's going to say, she's actually married, go home, and then they'll all live happily ever after. After all this, and presumably it worked that he got the money. The kidushin happened, Yosef was mekadesh, Belita, and remember it was just a kidushin, not a nisuin, and then he said, okay, hand over the documents were handed over. However, afterwards, Moshe, the father of the Kala, Avi Habas, Lihis Yaitz, he came to take counsel from the officials of the city. Mukadam is an Arabic word. And this, because of the Arabic influence over there in Spain, the Jews use that to refer to the officials. That wasn't it. Non-Jews also use it. An official is known as Mukadam. So Mukdam Yair is the Jewish officials of the Jewish community, V'chachamea and the Rabbanim. Now he's coming with a problem. In Tuchali, Nase Bita, is my daughter allowed to marry the Bachar Shahoisa Mishudachas like Koidam Kalamaisa? Is my daughter now allowed to marry the guy who she was engaged to before the whole story? So now we're finding out that this girl Belita, let's say the story now in order, okay, chronologically. Belita was a young girl. Her father made a shidduch for her. Okay, now he has a problem. He needs to get these documents. And so he goes to his brother, says, be mekadesh my daughter. Okay? And they do Maidah 1 and Maidah 2, these proclamations to protect themselves. Then she actually accepts kidushin from Yosef, which can't be effective. And great, the father gets the pikadon back. Okay, which and now the father is coming to the city officials and saying, "Can my daughter marry the original chassan who she was engaged to?" Now, what's the question over here? Of course, she could get married to him. In other words, your trick worked, right? Presumably, your trick worked. So let your uncle give a get. Which needs to happen. Let your uncle give a get. Let the uncle, Avraham, needs to get, what? His name was Avraham? Yeah. The uncle's name was Avraham. So Avraham is going to give a get, and then great, everything's great. She could get married to the person, to her fiancé. So what's the issue? What's the issue over here? So as we're going to see in a second, something in this plan went terribly wrong. As we're going to see in a second.
Why get the uncle involved if she already had? It's a double.
Why get the uncle involved? Why not do this trick with the boy, with the original chassan? Great question. So what's the answer? So I think what the answer to that is as follows. In order for that side to go to the wedding, what are they waiting for? They're waiting for a dowry. No dowry, no wedding. This guy doesn't have a nickel to his name right now, which is maybe even why he's pushing forward to do this. He needs a dowry to hand over to the other side. And the other side is not going to play games with him and say, oh yeah, we're going to go into this marriage and wedding, and then because it's like, then we're stuck. We need to protect ourselves that we get the dowry. So they're not going over. So he can't play this game with the actual chassan. He can only play this game with his brother who's kind of on his side. Okay. But that's a great question. And so now, so as I said a moment ago, something went terribly wrong over here. What went terribly wrong? Read number 5. The witnesses that observed the kidushin to her uncle, they were relatives. chasan in chamav, a son-in-law with a father-in-law. Who were these witnesses? These witnesses, v'gam mesiras hamaydah isa b'fneim. They also observed the first maidah, the first proclamation. So we have their names. They're signed at the end of the first maidah. They're signed Yosef and Chaim. Yosef and Chaim. Yosef is the son-in-law. Yosef is the father-in-law, and Chaim is the son-in-law. So now your first kidushin is no good. And that first maidah also may not even be valid according to Jewish law. Okay, good, but we have 3 layers. Baruch Hashem for 3 layers, right? We have 3 layers, so we feel all good. Guess what? The 3rd layer, the relatives were also related to each other. They were brothers-in-law. So the 2nd maidah, they were brothers-in-law, and so now the guy is left there with nothing. Oh my God, look what he built, this whole scheme. He took hadracha and eitzes and advice he got from people. Everything is working out, but he's using all relatives. And by the way, it makes sense why he's using relatives. Why? The whole thing has to be in-house, right? Because no one can find out about this. So the chassan, the guy who's Mekadesh's daughter, is his brother. And then he probably has these friends, so he wants fewer people. So it's a father-in-law and son-in-law, and it's 2 brothers-in-law. But right now what happened is no one observed, no valid witnesses observed the first kidushin. You could pretend like it doesn't exist. No valid witnesses witnessed the first maidah. You could pretend like it didn't exist. No valid witnesses witnessed the 2nd maidah, the 2nd proclamation. You could pretend like it doesn't exist. And oh my God, she was makabel kidushin from this Yosef. Oh my God, this guy,
She never said that she wanted it, and maybe
she was. Hold on, no, one second. Hold on. She was makabel kidushin from this 2nd guy, and boy, we have a problem over here. But there's a solution. Baruch Hashem. What's the solution? Who are the witnesses for the 2nd kidushin? Who are the witnesses who observed the 2nd kidushin? The witnesses who observed the 2nd kidushin were the same witnesses of the 2nd proclamation. So maybe that kidushin is nothing, so maybe she's good. That's why we have a question. That's why this is coming to the mukdamei ha'ir, to the officials and the chacham. It's actually interesting that the question, the way it looks like in Tudela at least, the way it works, is these types of questions about marriages, you go to the town officials. The town officials, they need to consult with the Rabbanim. They're going to consult with the Rabbanim. That's what happened over here. But he's coming to the town officials saying, what can I do? What are we going to do over here? So let's read the psak din that the mukdamim gave. This is all of these pieces and documents are all included in this lengthy tshuva, Siman Pei Aleph, by the son of the Rosh. V'anu based in hachasumim, us, the based in, remember, they call themselves, we're used to a based in being the Rabbanim. Here the based in are the officials. Nisyatzenu and Chachmeir, we took counsel from the Rabbanim. We already know who the Rabbanim are, because we saw before that 2 Rabbanim sent a shaila to the son of the Rosh. These are the Rabbanim, Rabbi Yomtiv and Rabbi Yehudah. So we took counsel with the Rabbanim, and Amru Lanu, and they told us like this: B'kedushim harishayim sheniskacha Belita, the first kedushin, ain't by a mamish, they're nothing. Uvi she'edim sheniskachu, because the relatives that observed it were related to each other, so therefore no get from the uncle. V'gam b'kedushin hashniim, also the 2nd marriage, ein b'hem mamish, don't worry about it. Lefi she'edim sheniskacha b'fneim, the witnesses that were presiding over it. But they add words here. V'hisminum le'edim, and who were invited and designated as the witnesses. Notice that language you did not have by the first Kiddushin. So those witnesses, so Yukrev said, they were also relatives. There's something very important that they're alluding to in these words, which we'll come back to later. So they were also relatives. So you don't need a get from the 2nd one. So this is what the rabbis told us. Inu, and we, the town officials, see that the rabbis are correct. So we told Moshe, you're all good. You can go along and make the wedding for your daughter. Whenever she wants to get married to whomever she wants, she has permission. We wrote this and signed this when? What is this? A month later. In the 27th of Adar, Shnas He'alaf in Kufchas, in the year 5108, which is the year 1348, Leminyonenu, here in Tudela. And here are the names of the 3 town officials: Chaim, the son of Shemtiv, Mukdam; Moshe, the son of Yehudah, Mukdam; and Moshe, the son of Yosef, Mukdam. This is, so they say, you're good. You can go ahead. You can get married. This happens in Adar. Remember, the wedding was Yudalit Tezvav Shvat, so this is about a month later. Now, they didn't suffice with this. They went to the Rabbanim and they said, Rabbis, we also want you to sign that this wedding, that Belita can marry whomever she wants. And obviously, why? Why? Because there was someone saying that it's not okay. Which is why you need all this extra effort to get people to say it is okay. And the Chachamim go ahead and they write a psak din. We looked into what the officials wrote, and we think you can rely on their psak din. Really, you don't need to strengthen their words. But nonetheless, because they asked of us to give our seal to it, in order to substantiate what they said. And look at these words. And in order to take any sort of hesitation or any sort of lies or any sort of defamation that anyone wants to say about Belita, so therefore we decided to be Mekayim this, to endorse it. When was this? 2 days later, on the 29th of Chodesh Adar in the year 1348, and they signed their names, Rabbi Yomtiv and Rabbi Yehudah. These are the Rabbanim. So obviously what happened over here is that Reb David, the father, didn't sit idly by and say, all right, I'll take the loss. I was outmaneuvered this time. That's not what Reb David did. Reb David found advocates to actually say, no. The kidushin, his kidushin of his son Yosef to Belita is actually effective. And indeed, there is a Rav who is going to be in Tudela, who is going to write a tshuva, who's going to say that their marriage is a valid marriage. Yosef's marriage to Belita is going to be a valid marriage. And we don't know who this rabbi is, but his tshuva is printed and incorporated into the Zichron Yehudah Siman Pei Aleph. We're going to call him Harav HaCholik, the dissenting rabbis. And he writes as follows in number 8. Amadati aksav ma'isa bezdin. I looked at what the bezdin did. And why did I look into this? Who am I to look into what the bezdin did? I'm not like the Supreme Court. Well, it was mitamap kid v'hagizbar. It's because I was asked to do this by the kid and the gizbar. These are terms for some sort of non-Jewish official in Tudela, and how I know it's non-Jewish is going to become clear as we continue reading. So in other words, some non-Jewish official told me, hey you rabbi, look into this story, doesn't look too good. To look into this well. And I did, and this is what I found. I found that Hamaisa Bezdin Nasa Shaloi Kedin, this Bezdin operated in an inappropriate way. Why? None of the relevant parties to this dispute showed up in court. Well, the father showed up in court. Belita's father showed up in court. He's not a relevant party. Although her father, Reb Moshe, came, it's not about his marriage. It's about her marriage. She's a Baigeres already. Once a girl is 12 and a half and up, her father has zero say in her marriage. So Belita needs to come to Bezdin. Belita didn't go to Bezdin. She's already mature. And the truth is, even having her show up is not enough. You need the chasen. Dilbeo, the kid from Beo. Shehu Baldin, because he's a relevant party to this dispute. You didn't do that. All you had is the father came, you listened to what the father said, and you gave a psak din. That's not how you do a din Torah. That's not how you run a court. You need to hear from both sides. So on a procedural level, something was flawed over here. Now, the rabbis of Tudela, this Rabbi Yomtiv and Rabbi Yehudah, they actually responded to a lot of what this dissenting rabbi said. And to this point, they say as follows: really? You were asked by the non-Jewish official to look into this? Adarabba, to the contrary. Hagizbar hoichichu b'fnei kol adas Yisrael. The Gizbar actually reprimanded you in front of all the Jews. Notice here. So, in other words, the Gizbar is not Jewish. He reprimanded you in front of all the Jews. Why? Because you did something wrong. What did you do wrong? Because you, the dissenting rabbi, went to this non-Jewish official's house, come upon him multiple times, lahasreis boy, telling him, urging him, not to allow this matter to go, but to investigate it, and to punish for this great sin. And you also told him that the Malchus, the non-Jewish government, should intervene and should punish. So in other words, don't say the non-Jewish official came to you and asked you to intervene. The truth is you went to the non-Jewish official and he got so mad at you for harassing him that he yelled at you in front of everyone. So everyone knows the story. You were the one that's trying to get him involved rather than the other way around. Now, Rabbi Yehudah ben Rosh, in his tshuva, and I recognize that we didn't talk about anything of substance as of yet. We only spoke about procedure. Rabbi Yehudah ben Rosh, all the way at the end of his tshuva, actually talks about this issue, this matter about who went to whom. Says Rabbi Yehudah ben Rosh as follows: if this would have happened in Castile, that a Jew would go to the non-Jews and get that their officials should talk about this, like intervene in this matter, then we would make a mishpat. We would make we basically sue him. And we basically say, who are you to go to the non-Jews? Do you have anything to defend your behavior of going to the non-Jews? And it doesn't seem to me that there's anything justifying going to the non-Jews in this case. You want to know if this marriage was a good marriage or a bad marriage? Why are you going to them? You could figure this out amongst the Jewish dayanim, without the intervention. And so, basically, Rabbi Yehudah ben Rosh is not happy about the fact that this rabbi, went to the non-Jewish officials in Tudela, and Rabbi Yehudah ben Rosh accepts as a factual matter that they're saying the truth, that this dissenting rabbi went to the non-Jewish official and not vice versa. And he says, if that happened here where I live, let me clarify, Rabbi Yehudah ben Rosh lived in Toledo, not Tudela. This could be, some people get confused. There's Tudela and Toledo. Tudela is in Navarre. Toledo is the capital of Castile. So it's quite far. It's all the way to the west. And just to make things a little more confusing, Toledo, the Arabic name is like Toletelo or something like that. It's a little different. So it only makes it even similar to Tudela. Okay, fine. But anyway, that's where the Rosh is. So he's like, if this happened in my backyard in Castile, then we would actually sue him for getting the non-Jews involved. Moreover, I have another problem with what this rabbi did. He only disagreed. When did he come out with his disagreement? After this girl Belita already got married. So now we know Belita actually got married to whoever she was engaged to. And you want to have that dispute? No problem. Have that argument before she gets married. But after, inappropriate. And I don't believe that you didn't know about this whole matter before she got married. And so therefore the Rosh is critical of this dissenting rabbi for two things. One, for talking only after Belita got married. That's number two. And number one, for intervening with the non-Jews. But none of that gets us to the substance of the matter. What is the substance? How could a rabbi say that the marriage was a good marriage? That the marriage to Yosef was a good marriage? Remember, we said the witnesses were all false all along. So how could you say the wedding of Belita to Rabbi Yosef is valid? He gave two arguments. He gave two arguments in his tshuva. The first thing is, he quotes and cites the Rambam in Hilchos Eidos, Perek Yud Gimel, Halacha Aleph, where he talks about who is valid and invalid to be a witness al pi Torah. Says the Rambam, Ein pesulim midin Torah ala kroivim mishpachas av bilvad. If you want to know by Torah law, the exclusion of relatives is only if through the father. For example, ha'av im haben, a father and a son can't be a peer of witnesses, or im ben haben, or a grandson, v'ha'achin min ha'av, siblings who share the same father. So they cannot be two witnesses. They're kroivim. They're puzzled to testify. A brother can't testify on a brother. And two brothers can't serve as a pair of witnesses as well. Avol sha'ara kroivim min ha'em. But if you're only related through a mother and not through the father, oy miderech ha'ishus, or you're only related through marriage, so then kulam psulim midivreim. So then min ha'Torah, you're a valid witness. And it's only midarabanan that you're not a valid witness. In our case, let's focus on the second wedding right now. The second wedding, why were they invalid witnesses? There are two brothers-in-law. So it's through marriage. So based on this Rambam, they're witnesses that are valid al pi Torah, but now they're only invalid midarabanan. So you can make an argument that midoraisa, the kidushin actually was chal, that the kidushin is an effective kidushin min ha-Torah. Oh, if the kidushin is an effective kidushin min ha-Torah, so then you can't just say, oh, because they're pasala edim midarabanan, so therefore the marriage is not a marriage. The Rabbanan don't have that power according to this thinking. The Rabbanan could say you have to do a do-over if you want to be married. Like, let's bring new witnesses. You want to be married, do a do-over. But to say that the wedding didn't happen, that you can't do. And where do you see that? You see that in the halachas gedolos. This is a work from one of the goinim who lived in the 9th century. Sometimes we call him the Bahag, Baal halachas gedolos. And the halachas gedolos says as follows: when a man is mekadesh a woman using witnesses who are invalid only on a rabbinic level, kidushin ma'ala lo have. It's not good kidushin ad the hadar mekadesh beidin kshedim until he redoes it with valid witnesses. But afilu hachi, nonetheless, le mishtaria la alma ela begita. She cannot go and say, oh, no kidushin happened, I can marry whoever I want. No. Because midairaisa, the witnesses are valid, so therefore the kidushin is chal, and she can't walk away. And so therefore, says this rabbi, in our second kidushin is a valid kidushin al pi Torah. She can't just walk away to marry whomever. Belita can't walk away to marry whoever she wants. She is linked to this guy, even though the witnesses are pasal midarabana. What about if you go by that logic? The rabbis who argued with him said, what about the first wedding? The first wedding was also then on the same level. So here he came up with his chiddush. And his chiddush was that, yes, the first wedding to her uncle was also in this way, where the Edom are valid min ha-Torah, pasal midarabana. So is Kiddushin Toifis? Is the uncle's Kiddushin Toifis in her? Yes. However, here's his novelty. Because midarabanan, it's invalid, so therefore there's still space in her for another man. And basically what happens here, and you do have this in the Gemara sometimes, we're not going to go too far in this, where there is a possibility of multiple Kiddushins being Toifis. You need to have a crazy case to allow it, and for him, this is that crazy case. Because Kiddushin number 1 was valid midoraisa, and only invalid midarabanan, so therefore I could say it's this in-between zone, where on the one hand she is mikudashes, on the other hand she isn't mikudashes. So she's mikudashes to her uncle, but also not mikudashes enough that when Yosef did the kidushin, that it's also chal for him as well. And so therefore, according to him, this woman needs a get from both of them in order for her to marry. Now, is this a slam dunk? Does everyone agree with this? No, not everyone agrees with this. The rabbis responded why they didn't think this was okay, and we'll share what the Rabbi Yehudah, the son of the Rosh, said later. But this was his argument. But
She was engaged already.
what? Engagement is nothing. Engagement, according to correct. She was engaged way earlier, but engagement is not kiddushin. No, engagement is shidduchin. Kiddushin is the act of putting the ring on the kala's finger and hareyat mekudeshes li in front of two witnesses. That's separate from shidduchin.
Why can't she marry the third person? Why can't she marry the third person?
So you wouldn't say lechatchila you're not allowed to do any of this. He would say lechatchila you're not allowed to. But yeah, if she did, then she would need a get from the third person. So he wanted to say she needs a get from everyone, and not only that, he went on to say that you need to be koifa the get. And he quoted the Rambam that we sometimes force, and this would be the case where we need to force all the men to give her a get. But that was his argument. Now he gave another argument. The second argument is a better argument. He says like this: even if you reject that first argument, but I have something else for you. What's something else? Okay. So here we need to talk about the problem. The second we talk about the fact that al pi Torah, witnesses, two witnesses that are related to each other are not valid, you come to the famous problem. The famous problem is what happens if relatives happen to witness something. So what's going to happen now? So the problem, the source that begins the conversation about this problem is a Mishnah, Makkos Parak Aleph, that says as follows. The pasuk says, "Al pi shnayim eidim or shlosha eidim yumas hames." The death penalty will be issued through 2 or 3 witnesses. Frek the Mishnah asked, Im miskayam eidus b'shnayim, if the witness, the testimony could stand by 2, what do you need to say 3? So the answer is to tell you to compare 2 and 3. Just like if you have 2 witnesses, if one of them is a karoif, or one of them is invalid, the whole edus falls apart. So too, if you have 3 or 4 or 5 or 100, if one of them is a karoif, the whole thing is going to fall apart. Oh, this is so. So now the question becomes, how am I supposed to understand this? So he understood this in a very minimalistic way. He wanted to understand this in a very, as we're going to see, in a very minimalistic way. Put a lot of constraints on this din. Why? Because you're at a wedding and there's relatives in the crowd. So now the wedding is not valid. So what's the answer to that? So for him, he says, you know what the answer to that is? The answer for that is, you only count as a eidos, you only are a violation of kroivim if, he says two things need to happen. He says one thing is, one needs to look at the other person and say, oh, I know you're invalid. There needs to be a recognition of where Reuven looks at Shimon and says, oh, I know you are a karev and you are invalid, number one. And number two, they need to do something together. They need to behave together. They need to behave as a group. One example is they come to Bezdin together and they talk in unison or something. There needs to be some element of togetherness. Without that, there's no problem and everything is fine. Why is all that relevant here? I want to remind you, way beginning of this year, we began that there were two witnesses that went up and said, do you want to accept this kidushin? Are you sure you want to accept? Why were they asking that question? They were asking that question because they were not representatives of the chassan. They were not representatives of the kala and her father. They were representatives of the chassan and his father. And they also wanted to protect themselves. They also wanted to make sure that this kidushin is actually going to happen. So what do? What's their layer of protection? We're going to do something very unusual. We're going to ask the girl, normally we don't do that. We're going to ask the girl, are you accepting it meratzin? They're going to go out of the way to do that, which is what they did. And the girl didn't say anything, but she at least accepted the kidushin. And the father said, whatever she wants, I want. And so that was good enough for them, and they protected themselves. Those were kosher witnesses. They weren't related to anyone. They were valid witnesses. They weren't related to each other or to nothing. And these two witnesses had nothing to do with the two whose names we have, the two brothers-in-law, who also happened to witness the maidah that was given a few moments before. They had nothing to do with them. Those two were kroivim. These two, the other two, that were coming mitzad Reb David, they had nothing to do with that first set. And they didn't even know that the first set was relatives. So therefore, based on the two tests of, in order to be invalid as a witness, you need to know that the other one is puzzle. They didn't know the other ones were puzzle. Moreover, they had nothing to do with them. They didn't testify in Bezdin with them. They didn't associate with them. They didn't take a selfie with them. Nothing. So because of that, he says, I have a great argument now. The second kidushin is valid min ha-Torah, and midarabanan, and everything. So forget my first argument. There's my main argument. My main argument is first kidushin, no good. Second kidushin, why? Because there were witnesses that were invalid. Second kidushin, witnesses were invalid. Guess what? We had other witnesses, right? With the uncle who was there in the room. There was no one there in the room, only the small people that were invited. Because that was an inside job. That was all within the family. But once it was with the other side, there were other people who were there. Other people, they were kosher edim, so now that wedding is good. And now that wedding is good, so now she's mamish only married to the second guy and not to the first guy. And so therefore, this is even stronger. So this is his argument.
Even if she doesn't want it?
So that becomes the question. You're saying she didn't want? She kept quiet. So shesika kohaida. At the average wedding, what happens? Does a kala say anything at the average wedding? A kala doesn't say anything at the average wedding. She sticks her hands out and she accepts it. Her father says whatever I want, she wants. A good argument can be made. That's consent. Great. So if you knew you didn't have consent, fine. But where are you coming from? The maidah? The maidah is maybe an argument to say that the kala is now we know, but remember the maidah didn't have kosher edim. So therefore, he's feeling really good. This dissenting rabbi is feeling really good that he has an argument now to say that Yosef is indeed married, that Belita is mikudeshes to Yosef, and this is the thrust of his argument. So these rabbanim, Reb Yomtiv and what was his name? Rabbi Yehudah and Rabbi Yehudah, Urabuna, they issued a lengthy response. Then they sent the whole file from Tudela all the way to Toledo to Rabbi Yehudah, the son of the Rosh. And Rabbi Yehudah, the son of the Rosh, wrote a tshuva on this. We already saw one piece from Rabbi Yehudah where he's not so excited about a rabbi going to the non-Jews about this. He's not so excited about the rabbi speaking up late in the game. But now Rabbi Yehudah, the son of the Rosh, is going to deal with the substantive issues. So it's addressed HaChachamim HaMaskilim, Rabbi Yomtiv ben Abbas, and Rabbi Yehudah Urabuna. Davar Pashutu be'enai. It seems obvious to me, Kal Maisa Bezdin and Lahashiv, that the work that you did, or that the Mukdamim of the community did, the officials that allowed her to get married, Ein Lahashiv. We're not retracting that. Why? I agree with the idea that the relatives are related to each other, in which case none of these kedushins took effect because of the psul in the edus. She doesn't need to get from either. What about the argument that it's only midarabanan, and if there's midarabanan, some midaraisa did stick? No. Ki kurvas ishus min ha-Torah. Through marriage is min ha-Torah. And he brings the fact that this is derived from a pasuk in Parshas Acharei Mos, and he says, I know the Rambam says it's midarabanan, but guess what? Rabim nechlaku alav. And he points out that this is actually a pattern in the Rambam. There are many things that most of the Rishonim accepted that's midaraisa, because Chazal darshaned it from a pasuk. And if you darshan something from a pasuk, the traditional view is that's midaraisa. Midarabanan is when the rabbis come up with their own idea. When the rabbis say muksa on Shabbos, so they're very clear that this is our idea. They're not deriving it from Sukkim, so that's a din midarabanan. But when there's a pasuk, and from the pasuk, from like Zayda Shava or a Kava Choymer or an extra word, the Chachamim darshan the pasuk to issue a new din, so the traditional view is that's midaraisa. And that's what happened over here. The Chachamim tell us that kurvas issues through marriage, a brother-in-law, a father-in-law, is pasul. It's derived from a pasuk, so therefore it's minat Torah. I reject this argument that it's only midarabanan. He says the Rambam has a pattern of doing this. Another famous case, he does it actually related to what we're talking about now, is kidushin. The Rambam says that kidushay kesef is only valid midarabanan. There's a kicha mistay efren, there's a gzeira shava and kidushin. Good. There's so much raid. A lot of yeshivish pages have been written around this particular issue. So here Rabbi Yehudah ben Rosh says the Rambam has a pattern of doing this. We don't accept his approach. The Edom are pasul midaraisa. The uncle's kidushin, invalid. The chasen's kidushin, invalid when judging it mitzad the two witnesses alone. However, hold on, don't run away yet. The father of the girl, this Moshe from Argudas, or whatever the place was called, he tricked you guys. He didn't tell you, he only told you about the witnesses were invalid, but he didn't tell you that there were other people at the second wedding. How do I know that? Because in the document from the Bezdin, from the Mukdamim, it doesn't say anything about there were other people at the second wedding. And if you decided that it's a non-issue, you would justify it. I didn't see you writing anything about what about the other witnesses that were there in the room. You didn't explain that. You completely ignored that issue. And you know what? If you would have sent for Yosef del Be'el, when you were accepting testimony, and you would ask him, what's your argument for your benefit? He would have said, he would have said, by the way, there were also good witnesses that were there. Here the Rosh is a little bit, the son of the Rosh, Rabbi Yehudah over here, is taking a little bit the side of the Rav HaChoilek, of the dissenting rabbi. Remember the dissenting rabbi said on a procedural level, it was wrong, you didn't hear from the other side. Well, here Rabbi Yehudah ben Rosh is saying, there would have been a benefit from hearing from the other side. If you heard from the other side, you would have said yes. You would have said to the Rabbi Yosef, you would have said, why do you think your marriage is a good marriage? The designated witnesses, the official witnesses, were invalid. He would have said, yeah, but there were other people in the room. And you didn't do that. And so in that sense, he's actually siding with the dissenting rabbi, saying that the dissenting rabbi is right, that you should have heard from the other side. Now, what's interesting about this is that if you read, I mentioned earlier, if you read real well when the mukdamim, when the town officials are writing their argument, they say, the first kidushin is a non-kidushin. Why? Because there were pasala Edom period. Then when it comes to the second one, they word it like this. The second kidushin is not a good kidushin because the Edom who were his minum le'edus, who were invited for the edus, were pasal. Why'd they add those words, who were invited for edus? Because they knew that there were other people in the room. Their argument was other people don't matter. What matters is the official Eidim that get invited up. And the official Eidim that get invited up, that's all that matters, to the exclusion of everybody else. So they kind of alluded to it, but they didn't develop it, and they didn't explain themselves, and they didn't justify it, and there were no sources that were brought for all of this. So now Rabbi Yehudah ben Rosh says, okay, so I need to deal with it. Let's deal with that issue now. Yes, these guys are invalid, but there's also valid witnesses in the room who had in mind to testify. It's important. They had in mind to testify. They came up. They asked. Says Rabbi Yehudah ben Rosh, "V'nirali shaloi batal ha'ra'aschem." I'm still going to stick with your ruling. Why? Basically, what he does over here is he brings sources to go in the opposite direction. The opposite direction I mentioned before. Nimtza mehem echad karov, if one of them is a relative, invalidates the whole thing. There's a major machlokes amongst the Rishonim, how you're supposed to understand this rule. So before, I showed you him, take this dissenting rabbi, I didn't tell you then, he quoted the Rif, and he took a very, very strict, what I would say, I don't know if the right word is strict, but his view was basically to minimize the impact of this din. How do you minimize the impact of this din? It's only invalid if you know about each other that you're invalid, and if you intended to testify together. Other than that, if 5 people observe something and then they come to Beis Din to testify, and it happens to be 3 of them are kroivim, the other 2 are still going to be valid. As long as what? As long as those 2 didn't know the 3 were no good and didn't intend to be part of that. So that was his view, in which case, coming back to our kidushin case over here, what do you have? You have the 2 kosher ones saw, they didn't intend to be part of the original group, did nothing with them, didn't go anywhere with them, I said before, and at the same time, they also didn't even know they were puzzle. So mitzvah that, turns out that the impact of this law is rather minimal, allowing for the second kidushin, in his view, to be valid in this case. Says Rabbi Yehudah ben Rosh, I'm going to go in the opposite direction. I'm going to quote from my brother. Rabbi Yehudah, the son of the Rosh, had a brother whose name is Rabbi Yechiel, and he says that he has piskei dinim for makos that did not survive. We don't have those, but obviously Rabbi Yehudah did have it. And he quotes over there Meir HaLevi, another one of the great Rishonim, who actually was a local, who lived in Toledo, a century before the Rabbi Yehudah, the son of the Rosh. And what do they do over there? They say, no, it doesn't work that way. Anytime there's any scene in the world that had invalids watching and intending to give eidos, bam, forget it. It invalidates everyone. So you could have hundreds of valid witnesses looking at it and coming to Beis Din. But if you had invalid, 2 or even one invalid guy who's part of this, who is looking and is like, you know what, I'm having a mind to testify in Beis Din, and then shows up to Beis Din or anything like that, it's not going to be valid. The entire eidos is going to be batal. Well, that's what we had here in this case. In this case, we have 2 witnesses who definitely intended to give eidos, and they did give eidos, and so therefore, and they were kroivin zalazeh, so they invalidate all the other ones, end the story, and this is a different view. Now, Rabbi Yehudah is pretty clear, if you read here, that he's not paskening for all generations, that this is the normative way to look at it, but he's saying, I'm happy to rely on that in this case. His lashon is Uchudayu Rabbeinu Meir HaLevi Lismoich Alav L'Kayim Ha'Ra'aschem. In order, you already ruled that the second kedushin is not a good kedushin, so we don't want to invalidate your ruling. We don't want to say a woman is married and living in sin. So therefore, we're going to rely on him for this matter. For the first argument, the idea that the marriages are good mid'oraisa but only bad mid'orabanan, that Rabbi Yehudah ben Rosh rejected out of hand. For this, he's walking a little more gingerly because of this fact that this is this major machlokes on this issue. Then Rabbi Yehudah ben Rosh adds another important point, actually 2 additional points. Number 1, he says, you know what? And this is Uri was raising this issue before. If you look at the circumstances of this case, it becomes rather apparent that this girl was not consenting. I know the moidah is invalid because you don't have valid witnesses saying that you had a moidah. So let's pretend the moidah didn't happen. But let's look at the narrative and the circumstances of this case. And when you do that, what are you going to see? This woman wasn't interested in the kidushin. So Rabbi Yehudah develops the point. Look how he develops the point. It's obvious that the only reason she is accepting this kidushin is because of the circumstances, but it's not her ratzon. Why? First of all, before Yosef Dilbeo was Mekadesh, she was already engaged to someone else. You don't walk away from the man you're engaged to unless there's a reason. We don't know of any reason why she would have walked away from that guy she was engaged to except for this. So that means that she's not really interested. If this is the only reason why she's doing it, it means she's not interested in marrying this guy. And indeed, this is confirmed because once the story was over, what happened? She went back to that guy. So what does that show you? That all along she wasn't interested in this. And in fact, he says, remember those good witnesses that came up? Why were they asking, are you sure you're accepting this meratzin? Because they too recognized, they knew about the story. They knew about the story from the chassan side, from David's side. And they knew that there's some game that's going on over here, so they suspected that, and so that's why they asked. So in other words, even they recognize that this is not something that she really, really wants. So if you look at the circumstances of the case, we're basically able to say this girl was not maskin. And so therefore, you don't need to worry about psulei eidos, not psulei eidos. If you think about this logic, you can say even if there were valid eidos only for the second wedding, we also would have been mevatel it. Now, of course, he's not saying that, because what the Rav does is he adds multiple arguments, and it's the confluence of all of them together that makes him feel confident in giving his psak. But just to bring out what he's saying over here is, imagine if they wouldn't have done this kidushin to Avraham, the uncle, and they wouldn't have done the two maidas. His argument right now is still, and there would have been valid witnesses seeing the second one. His argument right now is that kidushin, you would be able to say, is not valid kidushin. Why? Because what's the key for kidushin? There needs to be the ratzon of the woman. You didn't have the ratzon of the woman because the circumstances of the case demonstrate she wasn't interested in it. Then he goes a step further, and he says, the MS is, the Yosef Dilbeo, asa shaloi kahoigin. This Yosef and his father, they did something very inappropriate, because they tried creating a wedge and getting in a way between an engaged couple. And that's hasagas gvul. And that's not right. And you're not allowed to do that. And then he does something over here that's a fascinating thing that really opens an entire separate topic. Chazal sometimes say the concept of afkinu rabbanon kidushin, that someone behaves so wrongly that we will basically revoke the fact that we will say that the kidushin, which on the face of it is valid, is actually invalid. What's the mechanism? The simplest mechanism of how the chachamim could do this is hefker bezin hefker. Chachamim could basically say anything that you own, you don't own. So they could go back and say the ring that you gave on Wednesday to be mekadesh this woman, you didn't own that ring. And now you're mekadesh for something that doesn't belong to you. That's not an effective kedushin. And so now they're mevato kedushin lemafreya. They nullified kedushin lemafreya. The Gemara uses this on multiple occasions. It's a whole question in the poskim. Are you allowed to use this? We're allowed to use this. It raises all types of questions. Rabbi Yehudah ben Rosh here was willing to say that in this case, because they acted so badly, trying to break up an engagement, so Chachamim would have the power here to say afkinu rabbanon likidushin, that we're going to revoke the kidushin, and he adds that into the pile to therefore conclude and say what? That her marriage, Belita's marriage with her chassan, that she always originally intended to get married to, is fine and is valid, and the marriage to Yosef is a non-issue for all of the points that we just spoke about. Now, let's just conclude with the following. In 1841, there was a sefer printed in Prague called Avnei Zikaron. Avnei Zikaron, as you can tell from the title, is about headstones. There was some individual, no one knows who, and we don't even know exactly when, but sometime in either the 1300s or the 1400s, who copied down the text of the headstones in the cemetery in Toledo in Spain, and it survived as a manuscript until it was published in 1841. Documented here are 76 nuschais of different matzeves from the Jewish cemetery in Toledo. Amongst them, let's read, is going to be Rabbi Yehudah, the son of the Rosh. This is what the gravestone read. Obviously, this cemetery no longer survives, and so the only way we have this text is because of this unknown author who documented it, and it survived in that way. Ani anitzeves, I stand la'oisul maskeres, as a memorial. Shetachti nikberes, notice the rhyme, that under me is buried Gvias ish Yehudah ben Rosh, the corpse of Yehudah, the son of the Rosh, and it has a little bit of a biography about him, much of which we're not going to read, but I just want to read the following. V'nasa, what struck me is the following lines. V'nasa is bas achiv harav Yechiel. He married his niece, Yechiel. Erev Sukkot, Shnas Hey Mem Vav, in the year 1486, or it's actually 1485, Erev Sukkot. Achar Yom HaKisei, after Rosh Hashanah, I guess the next year, Ba Beisai means his wife died. Sometimes Ba could mean to die. Uva Afar Nitman, and was buried. Ban Aloi Bayis Neman, and so where did his family come from? Another niece, Bas Achi Reb Shloima. So his brother Reb Shloima, before we could, the first one was Reb Yechiel, now is Reb Shloima. He married his second niece, and that's with whom he had his children. V'yashav al kisei aviv teikav eis p'tirasai, and from the passing of his father, the Rosh, passed away in 1321. From then till the end of his life, Rabbi Yehudah was the Rav, took over his father, the Rav of Toledo. The Niftar, and he passed away Yud Zayin Tammuz Shnas Kuftes on Shevat B'Tammuz in the year 1349, which is a little more than a year after this entire story. But, so the first thing I noticed there is just this whole story, the niece looms large, and Reb Yehudah, the son of the Rosh, actually married a niece twice. But the main thing I want to say with this is something else. That is, as you flip through this Avnei Zikaron, we just read from Matzeva Hey. If you read Matzeva Dalid, the one who's buried there is Chaim. Chaim passed away when he was 14 on Yud Sivan in the year Loi HaChaim, which is Gematria 109, which is the year 1349. And who's Chaim's father? Rabbi Yehudah ben Rosh. So Rabbi Yehudah ben Rosh passed away in Tammuz of 1349. He had a 14-year-old son who passed away a month before that, the same year. If you read Matzeva Gimel, you see that his wife Miriam, that's the daughter of Shloima, his brother, she passed away at the end of Sivan in the year Menucha. The year Menucha is also Gematria 109, which is the year 1349. So now we have three family members who passed away in close proximity in 1349. If you go to Matzeva Membeis, you see he has a son Shloima, and Shloima passed away on Chamisha Asar Ba'av in the year Menucha, the same thing in the year 1349. So four members. Four members of the family of Rabbi Yehudah, the son of the Rosh, passed away in a span of, from Sivan, Tammuz of, in a span of 3 months, more or less, of 1349. What is going on over here? Well, it's actually clarified. Two of the Matzevas use the word Magefa. 1348, 1349 is the years of the Black Death, known as the bubonic plagues. The estimates of people in Europe who died range, some places it says the minimal number is 1/3 of the citizens of Europe died. Some places say 50%, some places say 60%, some places even talk about higher numbers, and a lot depends obviously on where where people lived. Both Navarre, Tudela, and Castile, Toledo, suffered from this plague, and it's apparently all these family members died at the hand of this plague. This is just a year after this whole story. I think it's fair to say that pretty much all of the names, and we read a lot of names. We had Belita, and we had Yosef, her chassan, and we had her real husband that she married, and we had an uncle Avraham, and we had Moshe the father, and we had the 3 Mukdamim's names, and we had 2 Rabbanim, and we had the dissenting rabbi, and we had the non-Jewish official, and I'm missing other names as well. We did a lot of names today. It is very reasonable to suggest that none of them, or few of them, I should say, were alive a year after this story, which is just gives you, when you realize that, it makes you pause a second. Here they're, we're fighting over this money, and we're at each other's throats, and then we recognize that. But life is very fragile, and this, for me, just reading all this, really brought it home. So while they didn't survive, at least the tshuva did survive, and the tshuva is an opportunity for fascinating learning. It does get into some real big sugyas, the sugyas of testimony and psulei edus, the sugya of a large group, some good and some bad. These dinim are discussed widely by the poskim, and there's much more to say about it. And this is just a small taste of these much larger sugyas.